All right. So my name is Paul Bailey. This talk is going to be about writing Python applications with the Google Drive SDK. I'm mainly going to focus on web applications because that's what I write a lot of, but you can use the SDK on native mobile apps. You can use it on desktop apps, really anywhere you want to. So a lot of these principles apply to all the different paradigms. So I have the URL to the presentation down here at the bottom, bit.ly/PyDrive. And if you want to check out the code, I have that on GitHub. And I tagged the code into 3 different steps. So if you want to follow through, of course, we'll start on step 1. Just do git checkout step 1. And as we go through the code, you'll be able to see the progression of what we're doing. So just in case you don't know what Google Drive is, it's the evolution of Google Docs. About, I don't know, it's been about 1.5 years now that they did this big switch. So think of it as like Google Docs, but it's also about storing files, more like a Dropbox type service. So you can sync files across computers, but you can also share and collaborate on files. It's also about editing files directly in your browser. So like with a Dropbox type solution, you're just syncing files. You might still need like Word or Excel to edit that file. Where with Google Drive, the API is really rich so that you can open that directly on a computer you've never been on and write an app to edit that file. So it's pretty cool. So why would you want to use Google Drive? You have maybe a requirement to store a file, but you want people to bring their own data store. You want them to own the file. A good side benefit of that is they're paying for the storage and you're not. So as a developer, if you don't want to worry about keeping files private or all that user permissions types problems, you can integrate with a Google Drive and store your files there. It also gives you hooks to allow for collaboration or for sharing, so a permission system, so you don't have to worry about that type of thing either. One of the really cool things that they just released pretty recently in the past year is also not only like sharing a file so you can collaborate asynchronously, but you can share files in real time, just like you would in a Google Doc. You can have multiple people in that file editing it at once. So it's pretty cool. Another thing you might want to do with it is integrate with other services. So I'm going to show you my app here that I have in a minute or so. And it's a code editor, but I don't really want to write an image editor in case you need to tweak a few images. So you can integrate, have it open that image editor right from the app, launch a new tab. So you can integrate with other services. And again, if you just need like a simple file syncing mechanism to maybe sync things to different computers, it's also a good solution for that. So what are some example Google Drive apps? So I was saying before, that's an image editor that I use a lot, is Pixlr. These are all web apps. Another cool online diagramming app is DrawiO. So if you want to do like a draw Visio type documents, you can do it right in your browser and you can share it in real time so you can collaborate on stuff. And this is my app right here, which is a code editor called Neutron Drive, which will let you edit your code that's stored in Google Drive, and then you can also work on it collaboratively. I have stickers at the end if anyone wants them, so you pick the right talk to come to. If you're looking for anything, you can just go into the Chrome Web Store and they have a Google Drive section. So you can see there's just a bunch of apps that integrate with Google Drive. And anything from, I've tried the cat out. It's a little bit simple right now, but it's pretty cool. I've done the video editing, so you can do video editing right in your browser. So there's a lot of cool things that you would think you can't do in a browser, but you can. All right, so let's get started into some of the code here. So like I said, I'm going to focus more on web apps. So this example app that I have is a web app. First thing, couple things you need to get started. You need so this app that I wrote will run on App Engine, so you're going to need the App Engine SDK. Also, to kind of get the Google Drive SDK running, you need the Python client library. You can get that from PyPy, but you can also download it from here. And if you're doing App Engine type stuff, they have this bundle that basically has all of the requirements of what you would need to run it. And I'm a Django guy, so I put Django in this project. All right, so let's get started here. So I got my code checked out already, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to step 1. And just to give you a little overview of what I just talked about, so you can see all of the different library requirements right in that directory. With App Engine, there's no pip install. You just have to include everything in your directory. So there you go. That's all the requirements to run this app. All right, let's see here. All right, so before we get started, to get the Google Drive SDK working, just like any third-party API, you need API keys and different things like that. So I want to go ahead and show you, because it is a little confusing. So this is the API console, and this is the test app that I created. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, just so you can kind of see me go through it. So the first thing you want to go through on services here is you want to make sure you turn on the Google Drive API and also turn on the Drive SDK. Now, if you're going to go ahead and package your stuff in the Chrome Web Store, you would want to come down to this Drive SDK, and you would want to fill out all this information. So when you do fill out all that information, when people go to Drive, and let's see if my app will come up here. So you can see this has my little cat icon there because I've registered this through the API. And also, if people haven't used your app and they have a file that they want to open, you'll register with different file types. So you'll be able to kind of promote your app with the different file types people are trying to open. So that's all this information in here. I'm not going to go fill it out because it'll take forever. But then the other important part that you'll want to go through is on this API access, is you'll want to come in here, hit this big blue button that says Oauth, and fill out that information. So now let me switch back to my PyDrive project because it has all that information filled out. So you can see it has my email, has the link to my logo. You also want to put where your application, if it's a web app, it has to know where it's coming from because it's only going to allow certain URLs. So I filled that all out here. And the information you'll need from here is this client ID and this secret ID. I don't really care if it's on video because I'm going to delete it at the end of the session here. So that's how you would set it up with this particular application if you want to get it running yourself. I didn't want to put these keys in the repository, So you can just make up this file called settings private and put these settings in there. And that way, if you want to run this test app that I created. So let's go ahead and start the app right now, just to show kind of the basic setup. So I'm starting my App Engine development server. And right now for this step one, cool, we have a Django app that's running. So now let's get into the actual like Google Drive type things. So the first thing we need to talk about a little bit, and this will be in step 2, so let me go ahead and check out that code. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about this API is Oauth. So let me go to my next slide here. So what Oauth lets you do is, with a normal API key, you might be accessing your stuff through some service, but with Oauth, you want to access someone else's stuff with your application. So the process is a little bit more complicated. So what happens is when the user logs in, they're going to see a list of this application wants to access your Google Drive. Are you going to authorize that? If they click yes, it's going to return a code. With that code, your application now will be able to request a token. With that token, you'll now be able to access that user's data on the service. So that's what this credentials model is. Basically, in the Python libraries that Google provides, they give you a credential property. So that's why this is kind of nice with App Engine. You can just store it in their data store. It's already set up for you. And that's going to store the token that gets returned that you'll use to access the user's information. I guess we can, just for fun, we can see what is, well, let me log in first, and then I'll show you what's actually in there. And it's just a bunch of data that you probably don't want to ever look at. So the other thing that you'll need to define is the scopes of what you want to access on that user's drive. So right now, and these are listed in the documentation, this first one is actually, I'm asking for everything. And then the second one is I'm asking for their email, and I'm asking for their profile information. If you don't have to ask for everything, don't, just ask for what you need. They recommend that you don't use that drive scope, but this particular test application, I want people to have access different directories. And I guess the smallest scope you can ask for is to access files that your application has created. So that kind of limits you a lot. So unfortunately, sometimes you have to ask for everything, even though you don't want to. If you create that directory, you could use the smaller scope if your application creates it, but your app won't be able to search through different directories then. So, and if you go to, the documentation is really good. They've actually gotten really good with their documentation. If you go onto the Google Drive developer site, you'll find all this information about different scopes and all the different calls. So I'm going to go through a few of the API calls. There's a lot more that I just couldn't cover in this presentation. So this is the smaller scope right here. Let me make that a little bigger. That basically would give you access to only files that your application has created. And then, but this is the scope that I'm using, where I'm basically saying, Even though I don't really want that full scope, I still want people to search through the directories and different things like that. Here's some other smaller scopes, like maybe you just need read-only access. Maybe you just want to look at just the metadata. So that's all your scopes. So these are actually specific to Google Drive. These other two scopes are more just generic Google scopes. So like I want the user's information or email information, so that's why you don't see them listed. They're actually listed on a separate doc. All right, so that's Oauth. So let me go ahead and start the app up, and so just so you can kind of see the process of what the user will see. All right, now I'm on step 2, and I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page. So you can see it's going to ask me, since I have multiple accounts, what account I want it to log in as. All right, so here's the scopes that we just talked about, and they're all listed out. Another good thing, too, why you don't want to ask for everything if you don't have to, is you're going to scare people off. So, you know, if you have like a simple game and you're asking to access their like full Google Drive, some people probably aren't going to install it. If you click these little information buttons, they'll give you the user more information of what you're actually requesting. So I'll hit accept because I trust my own application here. And you can see this was the code that we talked about. So, and we'll go through this here in the source code here in a second, but that's the code that my application took, and now with that code I requested a token that now gets stored in that credentials model. So let's go ahead and look at that credentials model, just because I said I'd show you it here. So if you haven't used App Engine, it has this nice little, in the development server, has this nice little console where you can come in and like debug stuff and look at different things. So let's go ahead and, so that's the credential just saved. Let's go to the interactive console. Okay. So that's all the information that it's storing in that credentials module. This is JSON. And you can ask for different types of token. With this test app, this type of token will basically run out, I think, after an hour. There's a couple of settings you can tweak so that you can just keep on refreshing your token. So once they're logged in, you don't have to keep on asking them for authorization. But for this particular app, you can see expires in 3,600 seconds. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of the code here. So if you go into all of the specific Google Drive stuff is in this editor folder. If you go in views here, there's only one view for the home page. This is the code that's running that home page. So let's look into that. So, and also in that views, you'll see a DrawiO class. So this is what's actually authorizing or doing all the authorization for us. So first of all, it's going to check if we've logged in before. I'm actually saving a cookie. If we haven't, this is what's redirecting us to the Google page right here. And then if you are authorized, it's going to go ahead and serve up this editor.html page. So we can go a little bit more further into the DrawiO because this is what does all of the Oauth magic. I'm not going to go really too far into it because the Oauth stuff can get really hairy. If you're doing stuff on App Engine, they actually have simpler methods of doing it if you're using like their web app 2 library, but with Django it doesn't really work. But if you're using their web app 2, which is another Python framework, you'd be able to put something like required login on your view, and it would do all that magical OAuth stuff for you. Now they do have all this code in the library, and I just kind of adapted it to my particular scenario. All right, so that's step 2 of basically we just authorize the user. All right, so now I told you this is just going to be a really simple editor. It's just going to be a text editor, so I'm going to put a text box, and I'm going to have someone select a file, and they're going to open it. It's going to open that text file, and then they're going to be able to edit it. So that's going to be step 3. We're actually going to do some stuff with the, I lost my session here. All right, so we're actually going to do some stuff now with the Google Drive SDK. So let me go ahead and check out step 3. All right. All right, so now let me refresh that page. Now, ideally, it wouldn't have asked me for my credentials again, but this is just a very simple app. So we have a little open button that I put here. We have a text area, and then I have a save button. So I'm going to go ahead and open a file. There we go. I'm doing my presentation right now. And now I'm going to save it. All right, so how did I do all that? My save was successful. So I wrote a view in step 3, which I call Shatner, because he's the negotiator between my app and Google Drive. And basically, when I hit that save button, I'm just doing like an AJAX request that's going to send all that text. And now I'm going to call the Google Drive SDK. So you can see from that request, I'm checking, okay, which task is this? I have 2 tasks right now. I have an open button and I have a save button. So the first thing you'll need to do is create a service. So the way basically Google is architecting all their APIs now is instead of coding all their APIs, they just write a document, and this create service parses that document, and from that service now is Python code that you can execute. So if they ever have to update their API, they don't rewrite their Python libraries anymore. They just push a new document out. They might have to update their libraries once in a while, but most of the time it's just updating a document. It's actually a really cool way to write an API because there's not too much to do. So that's what that service is. It's just creating a service. Can't really see it good because it's in red, but let's go ahead and I'll open it here so we make him see it better. So all that's doing is it's saying, I'm using the Google Drive API. I want to use version 2 of the API. The credentials are the OAuth credentials that we just talked about. And now I'm creating a service. And just like I said with the Google Drive SDK, there's a bunch of things you can do. So if you come down to this reference, on that service object, you'll have all of these hooks now. So if you want to do something with a file, you'll have a file.get, you'll have a file .list. These are all of the things that you will have attached to that service object now. And you can see there's a lot of them. So let's look at that save, what actually happened in the save task. So in the save task, since I'm just hard coding it for this example, so I'm just saying, okay, this is a plain text document. I'm getting the name from my AJAX request. I'm getting the content, and then I'm also getting the file ID. So this is more like Amazon S3. Even though they do show files and folders, everything is based on an ID in Google Drive. So that is really the most important piece of information, is what is the file ID. And it'll be some long set of numbers and letters. So I'm just creating a resource with basically that's like the metadata information. And then this is the actual Google Drive call, where there's the .files, which is this from this part of the documentation. And the documentation is really good. If you go ahead and click in here, they have like all of the languages listed out. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, so I'm doing an update on that file. So I give it the file ID. There's built-in revision control into Google Drive. So if you want to keep like a history of your changes, you can go ahead and turn that on. So I'm saying keep a revision. The body is just like the metadata of the title of the file and the MIME type. The media body is the actual meat of the file, the content of the file. And this is actually a cool little thing that an option, if you use that option that says use content as indexable text, Google Drive will actually index that file. So if you're doing like a binary file, you probably don't want to use that because it's indexable. But if you're doing like a text file, like this is, anytime now, I'm going to go ahead and paste that because I don't think I have that anywhere else in my Google Drive. So we'll see if we can search for it in a minute. Let me save that file again. So now, if a user goes to their Google Drive and does a search for that term, in a couple minutes here, it takes a few minutes for the index to kick in. That whole file is going to be indexed now. If you are doing a binary file, there's another option of where you can say, don't index the content, but index this text. And so you can give it text to index. And then you can see we just execute that API call. What I skipped there was the open. So this little open button, since I'm a web app, they provide some JavaScript tools for you. So if you just have to open a file, don't write it yourself. Use their JavaScript open dialog. They also have a share dialog. So if you this is my editor here. If you want to share a file, it's the same dialog that you see in Google Docs. So again, if you really want to, you can write your own share dialog. But if you're doing a web app, you don't have to. This will take care of it for you. Yeah, they do support mobile platforms. I'm assuming they have an Android widget. I don't know about iOS. So that's a good question too, because in terms of Python, because with your mobile app, you would have to write it in Java, right? But you could actually still use the Python SDK on your server side, and you can exchange your tokens from your phone to the server. And if you had to do like more hardcore processing, like on a file, you could do it that way then. So we were on the open. So you can't open like a file directly. First thing you need to do is do a get on that file. So again, it's using the file ID. Nothing works on paths or anything like that. You have to have the file ID. So the first thing I'm doing is getting the file ID. And then in that file ID, you'll have an attribute called download URL. You actually have to download the file, get the content of that file, and then I'm just sending that content back as the AJAX return. So that's what's happening when I select that. It's just getting the file ID and then asking my Python for what my Python service for what the content of that file is. Let's see if the index kicked in yet. So I'll do a search in my drive. Nope. All right. We'll give it a couple more minutes here. Hopefully by the end of the talk, I'll do a search and that to-do file will come up. Sometimes it takes a little longer. So we went over the open, which is just, like I said, you have to get the file first and then download it. And then we also went over the save, which is the update command. If you're saving a new file, you would do the insert. So that's right here. File insert. That will create a new file. And you can give it things like, so here's all the parameters, all the different parameters that you see in the code here, like all these different options are listed in the documentation right here. So if you like want to place it in a folder, you could actually place it in multiple folders if you wanted to, because it's all ID based, so that might get kind of funky for your users, but you could actually place things in multiple folders, the same file. That's what parents is, so you could place it if you have a parent ID folder. So that's all of the different options you can use are in these docs. So like I said, if you're doing a web app, if you don't have to, don't write a file picker. I didn't follow that advice. This is my app. I wrote a file picker because it was kind of important. So sometimes you might want to. Also, don't write if you're doing a web app, don't write a sharing dialog. That's already done for you. That's just a simple JavaScript call. So you don't need to do that. Some of the other cool stuff I'm going to show you here. So this is not really Python stuff, but they have a real-time API. So we talked about sharing. So the first part of sharing is just giving people access to your files, which would be this sharing dialog, But maybe you want to let people edit your file in real time. So let me close these files. So I'm going to open that same markdown file. Let's, all right, I'll just leave that there. So I'm going to do a little simulation here of what the real-time stuff would look like. So you can, if you would have multiple people in this document, they would show up on your little collaborators list here. And then you can see I'll enter a point here. Now if I go back to my other side, you can see the document updated. And if you see that, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little green icon cursor. That's where the person who I've shared it with is editing the document. Unfortunately, that's not in Python right now. It's all in JavaScript, so you'd have to do a web app. They are working on a Java library for this, so you'd be able to do it on a mobile app if you wanted to. But they give you they kind of do all the hard work for you, so it's really actually easy to implement. They give you 3 things. They give you a collaborative string object, a collaborative list, and a collaborative map. So you don't necessarily have to do a text file. Maybe you're just passing back, like if you're doing, like, say, a chat, you could use the collaborative list to maybe pass back items in that list, just like messages in that list. But with those 3 things, you can really do a lot. All right, let me close that down. All right. So that's the link to the documents, the Google Drive SDK documents. Now, with all that said, actually I finished my presentation up on Friday, like writing these slides up, and their intern released a new Python library that made a lot of these calls really easy. So you might not necessarily want to use my code. That just happened this past Friday. So they just released this the other day. They simplify a lot of the Oauth stuff for you, and where a lot of this was more complicated. They have a couple of the Drive calls that are really easy now. So like actually listing files in Drive is hard to do because it's not a file system. But now they made it pretty easy where you can just do a loop and you get all the lists. Normally, if you wanted to make a list of files, you'd have to like keep on making Drive calls because you're not going to get the whole list in one call. But that hides all that magic for you. So check that out. And then also, they have an example of a more complex code editor that will give you, I did a really basic code editor for this talk, but they have this Dr. Edit code editor. Actually, if you look in the Chrome Web Store, you can see like a half a dozen people try to like sell it. They just like posted it up there. So people already done that. So don't try and sell Google's own code. But it will give you a lot more in-depth Python example of doing stuff with Drive. So, is there any questions? In the back?
Besides text, what else can you implement these kinds of collaborative editing features with, like drawings?
So, let me show you the DrawiO app. Because actually I don't know so they have their own custom file format, and you can see, you can edit a document. Let me see if I can do the same little trick there. Yeah, I guess it's not showing me because I'm the same user. But their file format, I believe, might be like some kind of like XML type thing. So if you wanted to, you could use the collaborative string, and as you're moving stuff around, that's updating your XML, and then Google Drive with that collaborative string knows how to translate those changes. The other thing you could do is you could use the collaborative map. That's just like a dictionary, basically. So if you ever, like in Python, convert XML to a dictionary so that you could then like walk through it. So that's what the collaborative map could do for you. So then when you update that dictionary, it would get propagated to everyone else using that same dictionary. So you can really go way beyond just like collaborative text. With the list and the map object, you can do basically anything you want. I believe you can also create your own custom collaborative objects, but I'm not for certain how that works. So. So I know you can do that. What I'm not certain of is if you can do it through the Drive API. Let's see if we can maybe find it. Yeah, so I don't think that's a Drive thing. So with that, since that's like a specific to a Google Doc, they actually have what's called Google Apps Script. It's basically JavaScript that runs on Google. You can do that. And I know people who actually are doing that already. Where if one person opens a document, they can only access like a certain part of that document. Or maybe you have like a form, and so you don't let the person edit the document, just by typing, but you want them to fill out the form so that it's structured, and then that updates the document. So with Google Apps Script, you can do that kind of stuff. And now, with that said, if you're just on the document level, you'd be surprised. There's like tons of schools. This is like an upcoming technology for schools that use this to like manage documents on Google Drive for their like class. So there's like software companies out there right now that are like building it where you hit a button and it creates an assignment for your class and sends it out. And that's all through like the Google Drive API. It's actually really cool for classroom management of documents. Any other questions?
I'm guessing Drive API is sitting on top of Bigtable. If you wanted to, you could go and write to Bigtable or Cloud SQL directly.
So again, that would be another service. They have so they have a Cloud SQL service, which is basically like MySQL. With App Engine, it's basically the data store is like Bigtable, so you could use that. But it's other services, just not Drive per se. Oh, the question was, could you access like Bigtable directly through the Drive API? And the answer was not through the Drive API, but they have other services that with like App Engine. Basically, the data store in App Engine is Bigtable or some version. I don't think it's Bigtable anymore. I think that was like 3 years ago, so that's like really old to Google. I think they have a new name for it now, actually, but I'm not for certain. Question in the back?
I wonder if you could go into a little more detail about revision equals true, key revision.
Okay.
What's the internal format that needs to be exported?
So the question was, could I go into a little bit more detail about revision equals true? So if you go into the documents, actually I forget where it's at now, but basically it's just storing different revisions of your file. So you can think of it as you have backup copies of your file. I actually implemented this in Neutron Drive. So if I right-click here and hit revision history, it's basically with the API you'll get a list of all the revisions you saved, and then you can pull up any of those revisions. The one thing I'm kind of cloudy on is I don't know if they charge the users for all the revisions. So I guess you could kind of screw your users over if you're like doubling their data that they're using for like a really big file. I don't know if they do or not, but you can see here in my app, it just retrieved the revisions, and it's showing a diff of them. And then you can pull up that older revision, and then if you want to, save it back over if you want it to.
You can't publish at the bucket or can't publish something called that reversion history. It uses like
No, yeah, you don't have that granular of, to say, or to like publish like a certain revision. I don't think you have that granularity. It's pretty basic. You know, I consider it more of like a backup feature. You had a question over here? Yeah. So if you just go to, the question was this presentation on the web? Yeah, just go to bit.ly/PyDrive, and it will link you there. Any other questions? All right. Have fun with Google Drive. Come get a sticker.